He was Hollywood's king, the man whose grin could sell 1 million movie tickets and whose name alone could fill theaters across the world. She was its brightest star, fierce, funny, and as untamed as the wind that carried her laughter across the sound stages of Los Angeles. Together, they weren't just another celebrity couple. They were a living legend, two souls who found each other amid fame, fortune, and flashing lights, and loved each other in a way few dared to in that glittering world of illusion. The story of Gable and Carole Lombard isn't just a Hollywood romance, it's a tale of passion, destiny, and loss, a reminder that even the most beautiful love stories can end in heartbreak. Before the world called him the King of Hollywood, Gable was a man who had lived through hardship and heartbreak, a man who learned that love could heal wounds that fame could never touch. And Carole, she was no fragile heroine. She was lightning in human form, the kind of woman who spoke her mind, laughed at her own jokes, and lived without apology. When they met, neither imagined their lives would intertwine so completely that even death couldn't separate them. Their connection defied the studio rules, the gossip columns, and even time itself. They laughed when others whispered, loved when others doubted, and lived with a kind of freedom that felt rare even in Hollywood's golden age. But the same fate that brought them together would one day tear them apart in a tragedy that shook the entire world. It happened on a cold January night in 1942. A plane roaring across the Nevada sky, a woman full of life and dreams on board, and a man hundreds of miles away, waiting for her to come home. When the plane went down, so did the brightest light in Gable's world. That moment didn't just end a love story, it changed him forever. The King of Hollywood, the man who seemed larger than life, would spend the rest of his years haunted by the echo of her laughter and the memory of the woman he called Ma. This is not just the story of fame or fortune. It's the story of two hearts that found each other in the glare of Hollywood and held on, even when the cameras stopped rolling. It's the story of Carole Lombard and Gable, a love that glittered brighter than fame and vanished faster than a shooting star. Carole Lombard was born as Jane Alice Peters on October 6, 1908, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a place far removed from the glittering lights of Hollywood. From the very beginning, she wasn't like other girls. While most young ladies of her time were taught to be delicate and reserved, Jane was out in the fields, climbing trees, playing baseball with the neighborhood boys, and scraping her knees without a care in the world. Her mother, Elizabeth Bessie Peters, often said that her daughter had the soul of a wild bird, restless, bold, and impossible to cage. Her parents' marriage, however, was not as spirited. After years of unhappiness, her mother separated from her father, Frederick Peters, and took young Carole and her brothers to Los Angeles in 1914, hoping for a fresh start. The city was just beginning to grow into the beating heart of the movie industry, and though Bessie had no idea then, that move would change her daughter's life forever. In Los Angeles, Jane attended Virgil Junior High School, where her energy and competitive spirit made her stand out. She excelled at sports, tennis, swimming, track, and especially baseball, where her fiery enthusiasm earned her both admiration and a few bruises. It was during one of those games, when she was only 12, that fate stepped in. A director named Alan Dwan happened to see her playing and was immediately struck by her natural vitality and expressive face. He invited her to appear in a small part in his film A Perfect Crime, 1921. It was just one scene, but it was enough. The moment young Jane stepped in front of the camera, she felt something electric. Acting didn't scare her, it thrilled her. But stardom doesn't come easily, and after that first taste, the doors of Hollywood didn't swing open right away. She returned to school, grew into a striking young woman, and at 16 signed a contract with Fox Film Corporation. Around this time, she took the name Carole Lombard, a name that would soon glitter across marquees all over America. She began with bit parts in silent films, learning the rhythms of the industry, how to hold her own among directors and actors twice her age, and how to stand out in a business that valued beauty more than brains. In 1926, just as her career was beginning to gain momentum, tragedy nearly ended it all. Carole was in a terrible automobile accident that left her with a deep facial scar. In an era obsessed with perfection, many believed her career was over. But Carole refused to give up. She worked tirelessly with makeup artists and lighting experts, learning how to hide the mark without hiding herself. Instead of retreating, she came back fiercer than ever, determined to prove that talent and spirit outshine any flaw. That resilience, that refusal to be defeated, became the foundation of her legend. By the early 1930s, Carole Lombard had transformed from a promising ingenue into one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. She found her true calling in screwball comedy, a genre that demanded quick wit, sharp timing, and fearless energy. And Carole had all three in abundance. In 20th Century, 1934, she exploded onto the screen opposite John Barrymore, matching him line for line with dazzling confidence. Audiences adored her, not just because she was beautiful, but because she was real. There was a spark in her that made people feel like they knew her. Then came My Man Godfrey, 1936, a film that would define her career and earn her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Playing the spoiled yet charming Irene Bullock, she turned chaos into art, proving that behind her radiant smile was a mind as quick as her tongue. She followed it with Nothing Sacred, 1937, a Technicolor gem that showcased both her comic genius and emotional depth. Each performance added to her reputation as Hollywood's queen of screwball comedy, a title she wore with pride. Off-screen, Carole was as unforgettable as her characters. Known for her quick wit, honesty, and independence, she was loved by everyone from co-stars to studio executives. She swore like a sailor, laughed like a child, and carried herself like a woman who didn't need anyone's permission to be herself. She negotiated her own contracts, made smart business choices, and became one of the highest-paid actresses in the world. Yet beneath the stardom, she remained refreshingly grounded, sending money home to her family, keeping lifelong friends, and never losing that Indiana-born humility. Carole Lombard wasn't just born to shine, she chose to. In a world that often tried to dim a woman's light, she burned brighter than ever, lighting her own path through courage, laughter, and sheer will. What she didn't yet know was that her brightest role was still to come, not in a film, but in the love story that would define her life. Clark Gable's story begins far from the luxury of Hollywood, in a small town called Cadiz, Ohio, where he was born on February 1, 1901. His name was William Clark Gable, but the world would one day know him simply as the King. His early years, however, were anything but royal. His mother, Adeline, died when he was just 7 months old, leaving him in the care of his father, William Henry Will Gable, a strict and rugged oil driller. Life with Will was hard, a blend of discipline, labor, and survival. The two moved constantly, chasing work across the industrial heartland of America. Clark grew up learning how to fix engines, chop wood, and stand his ground. Emotion wasn't part of his father's vocabulary, and affection was a rare luxury. But beneath that tough exterior, young Clark carried a secret dream, a fascination with words, stories, and the glamour of the stage. He didn't yet understand it, but there was something inside him that yearned for expression, for escape from the grime and grit of everyday life. He dropped out of school at 16 and drifted between jobs, oil fields, factories, even working as a tie salesman, but none of it satisfied him. It wasn't until he saw a local play that everything changed. Watching those actors transform before his eyes, he felt a pull he couldn't ignore. That was the moment he decided he would become one of them. At 21, Clark joined a small theater troupe, performing wherever they could, barns, community halls, and traveling circuits. It was hard, uncertain work, but he loved it. He was tall, rough-hewn, and magnetic, but his speech was unpolished, his manners too raw for serious theater. That's when fate intervened in the form of Josephine Dillon, an acting coach and manager who saw potential beneath the rugged surface. Josephine was 12 years older than Clark, refined, patient, and determined to shape him into a professional actor. She trained him in voice control, posture, and diction, turning the awkward boy from Ohio into a man who could command a stage. Their relationship soon became more than professional. In 1924, they married, and Josephine poured everything she had, emotionally and financially, into his career. She taught him how to walk like a gentleman, how to speak with confidence, and how to dress for success. With her guidance, Clark began landing small parts in stage plays, gradually building a reputation for his deep voice and undeniable charisma. But Hollywood was still a distant dream. When the couple moved to Los Angeles, Gable's path wasn't easy. He appeared in silent films, but his rugged looks and strong features didn't quite fit the era's soft, romantic style. Hollywood at that time adored clean-cut, boyish faces, and Gable, with his crooked smile and masculine presence, was too unconventional. For several years, he hovered at the edges of success, taking small, often forgettable roles and struggling to pay the bills. Then came the turning point, the arrival of sound in cinema. The new era of talkies demanded voices that carried power and personality, and suddenly Gable's deep, confident tone became his greatest weapon. The same ruggedness that had once held him back now made him stand out. His big break came when MGM signed him to a contract in the early 1930s. The studio saw in him something the audience craved, a mix of danger, strength, and vulnerability. Under MGM's Golden Machine, Clark Gable became a phenomenon. His performance in A Free Soul, 1931, opposite Norma Shearer established him as Hollywood's new tough guy, the kind of man who could be both villain and hero. The audiences loved him. Then came Red Dust, 1932, with Jean Harlow, sultry, daring, and unforgettable, a pairing that electrified screens and cemented his stardom. But it was It Happened One Night, 1934, that made him a legend. Playing opposite Claudette Colbert in Frank Capra's romantic comedy, Gable showed a new side of himself, charming, humorous, and effortlessly masculine. The film swept the Academy Awards, earning him his first and only Oscar for Best Actor. Ironically, MGM had loaned him to Columbia Pictures as punishment, but the result was cinematic immortality. Throughout the 1930s, he ruled the box office. Films like Mutiny on the Bounty, 1935, showcased his commanding authority, while San Francisco, 1936, revealed his emotional depth. Then, in 1939, came the role that would define him forever, Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. With that performance, Clark Gable didn't just play a character, he embodied an era. His smirk, his confidence, his unforgettable line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," made him a symbol of the golden age of Hollywood. Off-screen, he was as complex as the characters he played. Despite his fame, he remained a man of contradictions, confident yet private, disciplined yet restless. His marriage to Josephine Dillon ended as his fame grew, followed by brief unions with other women, none of which truly fulfilled him. Gable had everything: wealth, admiration, power, yet something inside him still ached for something real, something beyond the cameras and red carpets. Hollywood crowned him the king, but even a king needs a queen. And when Carole Lombard entered his life, he found the one person who could see through the legend to the man beneath, a man still searching for love, laughter, and peace. It was 1932, a year when Hollywood was still learning to talk in sound, and the studios ruled everything from a star's paycheck to their public smiles. On the set of No Man of Her Own, two of MGM's brightest talents crossed paths for the first time. Carole Lombard, the sharp-witted comedienne with a disarming laugh, and Clark Gable, the newly minted leading man with a jawline that seemed carved for the camera. The film was a modest romantic drama. Gable played a small-town bank clerk caught up with a charming con artist, played by Lombard. On screen, they made perfect sense. Off-screen, they were anything but. Carole, already known for her fast tongue and refusal to swoon over big egos, found Gable too sure of himself. "Oh, that big ape," she reportedly joked to a friend after their first meeting, laughing off any notion of attraction. Gable, in turn, thought she was a little too loud, too sarcastic, too independent for his taste. He liked women who admired him, and Carole wasn't one of them. But something in the air between them refused to settle. Both were married at the time, Gable to Josephine Dillon's successor, Rhea Langham, a wealthy Texas socialite who was more than a decade older than him, and Lombard to the suave actor William Powell, her co-star from My Man Godfrey. Their lives were full of premieres, parties, and the constant gaze of Hollywood's gossip columns. Neither was looking for love, at least not then. Still, No Man of Her Own created a strange tension neither could name. During filming, Gable's commanding presence clashed with Lombard's mischievous humor. He was all business, dedicated to hitting his marks and keeping scenes tight. She, on the other hand, believed that a laugh between takes could make the performance more real. The two sparred in subtle ways, through witty remarks, sideways glances, and the kind of professional competition that only happens when two equals share the same stage. Carole loved teasing him. "Don't break a smile, Clark, the studio might think you're human," she once quipped after a long take. He glared at her at first, then smirked, a small, reluctant grin that suggested he enjoyed the challenge. She wasn't afraid of him, and that, perhaps, intrigued him more than he wanted to admit. When filming wrapped, the cast went their separate ways. Gable returned to MGM's relentless schedule. More films, more fame, more women chasing the man who had become Hollywood's ultimate dream. Carole threw herself into her comedy roles, her energy untamed, her laughter echoing through every studio lot she touched. But in the back of their minds, both remembered that spark, that curious, irritating, undeniable chemistry that refused to fade. They didn't call it love. They didn't even call it attraction. It was simply something, a flicker, a pulse, the first quiet hint of a story neither of them knew was only beginning. At the time, they couldn't have imagined that one day, their names would be spoken together as one, Carole and Clark, whispered not just as Hollywood's greatest romance, but as one of its most heartbreaking. In 1932, they were just two stars in orbit, unaware that destiny was already drawing their paths toward collision. By the mid-1930s, Hollywood was at its most dazzling, a world of silver screens, champagne nights, and stars so bright they seemed untouchable. But behind the glitter, real lives unfolded, fragile, complicated, human. For Clark Gable and Carole Lombard, fate was quietly weaving its golden thread, pulling them back toward each other. For years had passed since no man of her own. Both had changed. Both had been tested by love, fame, and heartbreak. Carole was now divorced from William Powell, a separation handled with mutual respect and even lingering affection. The two had remained close friends, often spotted laughing together at parties long after their marriage ended. Powell had once described her as the perfect wife for another man, and in some strange, prophetic way, he was right. Clark, meanwhile, was trapped in a different kind of arrangement. His marriage to Rhea Langham, the elegant Texas socialite who had helped him climb the social ladder, had turned cold. Rhea had given him access to wealth, refinement, and Hollywood's elite circles, but not the joy or companionship he longed for. She was proud, sophisticated, and demanding, and Gable, for all his fame, felt increasingly like a man playing a role off-screen as well as on. MGM, his studio, didn't encourage scandal or divorce. They needed him to remain the king of Hollywood, not a man searching for freedom. Then, one night in 1936, the curtain lifted again. It was a charity ball, one of those glittering Hollywood evenings where everyone who was anyone came to see and be seen. Carole arrived dressed in white, radiant, and laughing as always, her golden hair catching the light of the chandeliers. Clark was there too, towering above the crowd, impeccably dressed, the picture of charm. Their eyes met across the room, a flicker of recognition, a shared memory from years ago. This time, something was different. Carole, ever the jester, made the first move. "Well, if it isn't the big ape himself," she teased with that familiar sparkle in her eyes. Clark chuckled, shaking his head. "Still got that sharp tongue, huh?" he replied. The banter that had once kept them apart now drew them in. They talked that night, really talked, about films, about life, about the loneliness that even fame couldn't cure. And when the orchestra played its last tune, neither wanted the evening to end. Over the months that followed, friendship bloomed. They began speaking on the phone late into the night, conversations that started as jokes and ended in confessions. Carole's laughter, wild and contagious, became his escape from the weight of MGM's expectations. Clark's voice, steady and low, became her anchor in a world that often felt too shallow. They went on hunting trips, drove out into the desert, met in quiet corners away from the Hollywood spotlight. Carole would surprise him with practical jokes, once giving him a set of pigs as a birthday gift just to watch his reaction. He adored her irreverence. She loved that he let his guard down with her. For the first time, Clark could stop being the king and simply be Clark. And for Carole, who had built her career on strength and independence, it felt good to lean into something real, something tender. By 1937, the bond had deepened into love. It was still a secret, hidden from the public eye and carefully shielded from MGM's executives, who worried that scandal could tarnish their biggest star. Clark was still technically married, and divorce in that era was risky for a studio man. But their connection was undeniable. Carole, ever understanding, never pressured him. "I'll wait," she told him once, her tone soft but sure. "But don't keep me waiting forever." Clark, torn between duty and desire, began to imagine a life beyond the gilded cage of his studio contract and marriage. She wasn't just his lover, she was his friend, his confidant, the person who reminded him what laughter and freedom sounded like. When they were together, Hollywood's pressures melted away. They would sit on her ranch in Encino, barefoot and unpretentious, sharing stories under the California stars. He'd call her Ma and she'd call him Pa, their private nicknames for a love that felt as ordinary as it was extraordinary. By 1938, the secret was barely a secret anymore. Everyone on the lots could see it. The way his face lit up when her name was mentioned, the way she'd rush to the phone whenever he called. For Clark and Carole, love had become their quiet rebellion. Proof that even in a world built on illusion, something genuine could still take root. It was no longer just fate bringing them together. It was choice. Two souls finally ready for the kind of love they'd both been denied. The spark that had once flickered on a movie set in 1932 was now a fire, burning brighter than either of them had ever known. By 1939, the love story that had been quietly unfolding behind the velvet curtains of Hollywood was ready to step into the light. Clark Gable, the world's most desired man, was finally free. After years of a strained, loveless marriage, his divorce from Rhea Langham was finalized. For once, it wasn't the studios or the headlines deciding his fate. It was Clark himself. And at the center of that choice stood Carole Lombard, the woman who had not only captured his heart but restored his spirit. The day they married, March 29, 1939, was nothing like the lavish Hollywood spectacles fans might have imagined. There were no spotlights, no crowds, no press. Instead, Clark and Carole slipped away quietly to Kingman, Arizona, a small desert town off Route 66. He wore a simple brown suit, she, a modest two-piece suit and a corsage. They exchanged vows in a brief civil ceremony before a local judge, with only a few witnesses. It was humble, unpretentious, and deeply personal, exactly how they wanted it. Afterward, they climbed into Clark's car, laughing like teenagers, and drove off together into the open road. They stopped at a roadside diner for fried chicken and coffee, sharing jokes and teasing one another. For two of the biggest stars in the world, it wasn't about glamour. It was about the simple joy of being together without pretense or performance. When they returned to California, they bought a 20-acre ranch in Encino, a quiet haven far removed from the glitz of Beverly Hills. They called it the Love Farm, and it quickly became their refuge. There, among the rolling fields and orange groves, Clark and Carole lived a life that was startlingly normal. He would mend fences, ride horses, and work the land with his bare hands. She would cook breakfast, tend to their chickens, and chase the dogs across the yard. Carole adored ranch life. Despite her star status, she found joy in the ordinary, collecting eggs, baking pies, and surprising Clark with his favorite meals after long days on set. "I'm just Mrs. Gable now," she'd joke to friends, half proud, half playful. She called him Pappy, a nickname that made even the king of Hollywood blush, while he affectionately called her Ma. They teased, laughed, and loved with an ease that few Hollywood couples ever knew. What made their marriage remarkable wasn't just the passion, it was the friendship beneath it. Carole was the one person who could puncture Clark's ego, make him laugh until his eyes watered, and remind him that beneath the crown, he was still a man. She grounded him. When he was moody or quiet, she'd pull a prank, filling his boots with gravel or hiding fake snakes in his drawers, just to hear him laugh. When the press tried to turn them into a fairy tale, she refused the title of queen. "There's only one king in this house," she'd say with a grin, "and I'm just here to keep him humble." Clark, for his part, was utterly devoted. He admired her independence, her courage, and her refusal to play the Hollywood game. He once said that Carole was the best man he ever met, a compliment only he could make sound like a declaration of love. She didn't just make him happy, she made him human. Their life at the ranch became the stuff of quiet legend. Neighbors often spoke of seeing the couple riding horses side by side at sunrise, laughing as they raced through the fields. They'd host casual barbecues where stars mingled with ranch hands, and no one cared who was famous. For once, Clark wasn't Rhett Butler, and Carole wasn't the screwball queen. They were just two people who had found home, not in a mansion or a studio, but in each other. 1939 also happened to be the year of Gone with the Wind, the film that immortalized Clark as Rhett Butler and made him a global icon. While the world swooned over his on-screen romance with Scarlett O'Hara, his heart belonged firmly to the woman waiting for him back at the ranch. When the movie premiered, Carole stood beside him in the crowd, proud and beaming, teasing him later about that damned line everyone was quoting. "Frankly, my dear," she whispered, "you'd better still give a damn about me." He always did. In a town where so many marriages were staged for publicity, theirs was startlingly genuine, raw, messy, and real. They argued like normal couples, made up just as passionately, and loved without performance. They didn't need Hollywood's approval. Their story wasn't written by a studio, it was written by life itself. For Clark Gable, who had spent his entire career being called the king, Carole Lombard was more than a queen. She was his equal, his mirror, his heart. Together, they proved that even in a world built on illusion, love could still be authentic, and that sometimes the greatest roles aren't played in front of a camera, but in the quiet moments between two souls who finally find home in each other. Behind the gates of their Encino ranch, far from the flashbulbs and studio gossip, Clark Gable and Carole Lombard built something Hollywood rarely allowed, a real marriage. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was theirs. Their home was filled not with the echoes of fame, but with laughter, the kind that starts in the belly, ends in tears, and fills a house with warmth. Carole was the spark that lit every room she entered. Her quick wit and mischievous humor became legendary among their friends. She loved practical jokes, sneaking fake snakes into Clark's bed, swapping his shaving cream for whipped cream, or answering the phone in a fake accent when studio executives called. Clark would roar in mock frustration, then burst out laughing. "You damned woman," he'd say, shaking his head, "you'll be the death of me." And she'd grin, "Maybe, but at least you'll die laughing." Their friends adored them because they were so normal. They didn't play the Hollywood couple. No matching outfits, no choreographed appearances. When guests visited the ranch, they found Carole barefoot in the kitchen, hair tied back, whipping up scrambled eggs or fried chicken. Clark might be outside fixing a fence or washing his car, cigarette hanging from his lip, grease on his hands. They'd tease each other constantly, never letting fame come between them. Carole's humor met Clark's toughness like water meets stone, softening it without wearing it down. She was unafraid to challenge him, to call him out when his temper flared, or to comfort him when he carried the weight of too many expectations. Clark had always been known for his strength, the rugged, silent man's man, but Carole saw beyond that. She saw the shy boy from Ohio, the one who'd grown up without tenderness, and gave him a kind of love he'd never known before. She was the only woman who could make Gable blush, one friend famously said. It was true. For all his on-screen confidence and off-screen swagger, Carole could disarm him with a single look. When reporters asked about their secret, she'd smile slyly and say, "He's not nearly as tough as he looks. I just let him think he is." And Clark, for all his pride, adored her for it. She supported him in every way. When he was filming long hours, Carole would drive to the set with home-cooked meals, sit quietly behind the cameras, and wait for him to finish. She never tried to overshadow his career, instead, she anchored it. And Clark, who had spent so much of his life performing, found in her a place where he didn't have to act at all. At night, they would sit on the porch, watching the California sunset fade into the hills. Sometimes they'd talk about the future, children, more land, maybe slowing down someday. Sometimes they'd say nothing at all, just listening to the wind rustle through the orange trees. For a man who had conquered Hollywood, Gable's greatest victory was this peace, this ordinary happiness he'd never thought possible. "She was my anchor," he told a friend once. "The only real thing I ever had." And it was true. In a world of illusions, Carole Lombard was Clark Gable's reality. Bright, grounding, and full of life. Together, they made their ranch a small paradise, not one of luxury, but of love, laughter, and the rare kind of joy that comes when two souls finally stop searching and simply belong. December 1941. The world shifted overnight. The news of the attack on Pearl Harbor hit America like a thunderclap, shattering the illusion of distance from the war raging overseas. Across the country, fear, anger, and determination rippled through every home, including the quiet ranch in Encino where Clark Gable and Carole Lombard had built their private paradise. Carole, never one to sit still or watch from the sidelines, felt the call to action immediately. She wasn't just a movie star, she was an American patriot, fiercely proud of her country and deeply loyal to the men who were now being sent to fight. "We all have to do our part," she told friends. "Every one of us." Her energy, her conviction, her sense of duty, they burned brighter than ever. Hollywood quickly mobilized for the war effort. Stars lent their faces to posters, their voices to radio drives, their time to rallies and fundraising tours. But Carole wasn't content with just posing for photographs. She wanted to do something, to be out there, among the people. So when the U.S. Treasury organized a massive national tour to sell war bonds, she didn't hesitate for a second. She volunteered to lead it herself, the first major Hollywood star to take the campaign on the road after America entered the war. Clark, meanwhile, had his own worries. MGM had him locked into a film schedule, but his heart wasn't on set. He knew how fearless Carole could be, how she threw herself into everything she believed in with her whole being. He supported her, of course, but quietly he feared the chaos of wartime travel, the uncertainty of the skies, and the dangers of such a demanding mission. He'd always called her his daredevil, but this time, her daring spirit filled him with unease. Carole didn't let fear stop her. In early January 1942, she set out on her Bond tour, joined by her beloved mother, Elizabeth Peters, and MGM's trusted publicist, Otto Winkler. They traveled across the Midwest, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio, rallying massive crowds in theaters, train stations, and public halls. Carole was tireless. She'd take the stage in glamorous gowns, wave the flag high, and deliver speeches that brought audiences to tears. Her humor, sincerity, and charm made her unstoppable. She urged Americans to open their hearts and their wallets for the troops. In just days, she helped raise over $2 million in war bonds, an extraordinary sum for the time. Newspaper headlines called her the Star-Spangled Sensation. But beneath the applause, exhaustion was setting in. She had been traveling non-stop, smiling through fatigue, pushing herself harder than ever. Her friends urged her to rest, to take the train back to Los Angeles. But Carole, impatient and eager to return home to Clark, insisted on flying. On January 15, 1942, she telephoned him from Indianapolis. The conversation was short but full of love. "You proud of me, Pappy?" she teased. "Always, Ma," he replied, his voice warm but weary. "Come home safe." She laughed, that bright, ringing laugh he loved so much, and promised, "You bet your life I will." She had one last appearance scheduled that night, a rousing speech at the Indiana State House, where she urged Americans to give everything to the cause. Her final words to the cheering crowd echoed like a prophecy, "Before I say goodbye, buy a bond for victory." The next morning, January 16th, Carole, her mother, and Winkler boarded Trans World Airlines Flight 3 from Las Vegas, bound for Los Angeles. Clark waited anxiously for her return, unaware that fate, the same force that had brought them together, was about to tear their world apart. The laughter that had filled their ranch was about to fall silent. The mission had been a triumph. Carole Lombard had inspired thousands, selling over $2 million in war bonds and igniting patriotic fervor across America. Tired but exhilarated, she was ready to return home to Clark. All she wanted was to see him again, to rest in his arms after days of speeches, smiles, and sleepless travel. But fate had other plans. When her team prepared to board a train back to California, Carole, ever impatient, waved off the idea. "I'll get there faster by air, Pappy," she told Clark in a quick phone call, laughing as always, that light, teasing laugh that made everything feel safe. He had urged her gently to take the train, uneasy about her rush, but she reassured him, confident as ever, "Don't worry, I'll be home before you miss me." That evening, January 16, 1942, TWA Flight 3 took off from Las Vegas, bound for Burbank. On board were 19 passengers, including Carole, her mother Elizabeth Peters, and MGM publicist Otto Winkler, along with 3 crew members. The night was clear but dark, the mountains invisible in the desert blackness. Minutes after takeoff, tragedy struck. The aircraft veered off its designated course and slammed into the rugged slopes of Mount Potosi, about 32 miles southwest of Las Vegas. There were no survivors. The fiery crash lit up the Nevada desert, leaving behind wreckage scattered across the mountainside. When the news reached Hollywood, it was as if the entire dream factory fell silent. Radios broke the story first, and within hours, studios shut down in mourning. Stars gathered in disbelief: Katharine Hepburn, James Stewart, Spencer Tracy, all stunned. But no one was hit harder than Clark Gable. He refused to believe it at first. Some reports said the plane was missing, others that there might be survivors. Ignoring the pleas of MGM executives, Gable flew to Nevada immediately. Dressed in military khakis, he drove up the rugged mountain terrain himself, insisting on being part of the search. Witnesses said he climbed among the charred wreckage, calling her name until his voice broke. When he found her wedding ring among the remains, he collapsed to his knees, trembling, and whispered, "My Ma." The world's king of Hollywood, the man of strength, swagger, and stoic charm, was utterly undone. Reporters kept their distance as he stood among the debris, the smoke still rising, the desert wind cold and cruel. He stayed there until his body gave out, carried away only when he could no longer walk. Carole Lombard, 33 years old, had burned bright and beautiful, and gone too soon. Her death marked not just the loss of a star, but the end of a golden love story that even Hollywood couldn't script again. The laughter of their ranch, the warmth of their nights, all silenced in a single, tragic moment above the Nevada desert. When Carole Lombard's light was extinguished, something inside Clark Gable died with her. The laughter that once echoed through their Encino ranch fell silent, the farmhouse now filled with ghosts of memories, her perfume lingering in the air, her laughter still trapped in the walls. Friends who visited him in the weeks that followed said it was as if the king had lost his crown. Hollywood mourned alongside him, but no one could reach him. The studios offered roles, reporters begged for interviews, yet Gable withdrew from the world that had once adored him. He'd sit on the porch of their ranch, staring into the distance for hours. To his close friend and publicist Otto Winkler's widow, he confessed softly, "She was the only woman who ever really made me happy." But Gable was not a man who wallowed, he was a man of action. And so, in 1942, only months after Carole's death, he made a decision that shocked Hollywood. At 41, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces, determined to serve the country Carole had died helping. "If she gave her life for this war effort," he told his commanding officer, "then the least I can do is finish what she started." He refused special treatment despite his fame. As a captain in the 351st Bomb Group, Gable flew 5 combat missions over Europe as an aerial gunner and photographer. Fellow airmen described him as brave, humble, and quietly grieving, a man who seemed to be searching for something beyond survival. When asked why he risked his life so willingly, he simply said, "I just want to be closer to her, up there." For his courage, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal. But medals couldn't mend a broken heart. After the war ended, he returned to Hollywood, trying to rebuild what was left of his career. He acted in films like The Hucksters, 1947, and Mogambo, 1953, and though the charm remained, the sparkle behind his smile was gone. Those who knew him well could see it. Carole's death had taken the part of him that believed in happy endings. He married twice more, to Lady Sylvia Ashley and later to Kay Williams, but neither marriage carried the magic he once shared with Carole. He was polite, kind, but distant, one friend recalled. He loved, but never the same way again. In quiet moments, Gable often returned to their Encino ranch, walking the fields where Carole once raised chickens and teased him about his cowboy ways. He kept her pictures close, her ring in a box, and her memory alive in every small ritual. The same breakfast coffee she liked, the same music she loved. To the world, Clark Gable remained the king of Hollywood. But to those who truly knew him, he was a man forever haunted, a man who had touched the rarest kind of love and spent the rest of his life chasing the echo of her laughter in the wind. After the war, Clark Gable returned to Hollywood, but the man who once embodied effortless confidence now carried a quiet weight behind his eyes. He resumed acting, reclaiming his throne on the silver screen, yet something in him had changed forever. His first major post-war film, The Hucksters, 1947, paired him with Deborah Kerr and gave audiences a glimpse of the Gable they remembered, sharp, charming, and self-assured. But colleagues noticed the difference. Between takes, he'd drift into silence, lost in thought. He went on to star in Mogambo, 1953, opposite Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly, a lush African adventure that earned him another Academy Award nomination. On screen, he was still the king, but off-screen, his laughter came less easily. Hollywood continued to revere him, but Gable himself had grown weary of fame. He married twice more, first to Lady Sylvia Ashley in 1949, a British actress and widow of Douglas Fairbanks Sr., and later, in 1955, to Kay William Spreckles, a warm-hearted former model who brought some comfort to his final years. Yet, as those close to him often said, these were marriages of companionship, not passion. The spark that once set his heart ablaze with Carole Lombard never reignited. By the late 1950s, Gable's health had begun to decline, worn down by years of smoking, drinking, and the emotional toll of loss. Still, he pushed himself to finish The Misfits, 1961, a raw, melancholy film written by Arthur Miller and co-starring Marilyn Monroe. The story, about lonely people searching for meaning, mirrored Gable's own life more than he ever realized. Those who saw him on set said he gave everything he had to the role, as if he sensed it would be his last. Just 12 days after completing filming, on November 16, 1960, Clark Gable suffered a massive heart attack at his Los Angeles home. He was 59 years old. The news broke like thunder across Hollywood. The king was gone. Marilyn Monroe wept openly. Old friends gathered in stunned silence. But those who knew his heart believed that, at last, he was free, reunited with the woman he had never stopped loving. Per his wish, Gable was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, in the Sanctuary of Trust. And beside him lies Carole Lombard, who had waited for him there since 1942. Their matching marble crypts rest side by side, simple, elegant, and eternal. No grand monuments, no gilded tributes. Just two names carved in stone, forever joined, a silent testament that love, once found, never truly dies. Even today, visitors leave flowers, notes, and quiet tears at their resting place. Because Clark and Carole's story, one born in laughter, tested by loss, and sealed in eternity, reminds us that the greatest love stories don't fade with fame. They live on, just like theirs, in the spaces between stars. Carole Lombard was only 33 years old when her plane fell from the sky, but in those brief years, she lived more fully than most ever would. She shattered every mold Hollywood tried to place her in. Bold, witty, fiercely independent, and full of fire. On screen, she was the queen of screwball comedy, her timing flawless and her spirit electric. Off-screen, she was the heartbeat of every room, the woman who laughed too loudly, loved too deeply, and gave herself completely to life. Her friends remembered her as someone who never hid behind glamour, who spoke to everyone, from the studio head to the stagehand, with the same warmth and respect. Carole Lombard wasn't just admired, she was adored. Clark Gable, meanwhile, lived to be 59, but it was his heartbreak, not his fame, that defined his legend. To the public, he was the king of Hollywood, the ultimate leading man, rugged, confident, irresistible. But those who knew him best saw the truth. The man who had everything the world could offer, yet was haunted by the one thing he could never have again. After Carole's death, Gable carried her memory like a sacred flame, quietly enduring the years, smiling for cameras, but always a little distant, a little lost. Their love story has become one of Hollywood's most enduring legends, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It wasn't built on publicity or image, it was built on laughter, friendship, mutual respect, and a love that could withstand anything, except fate. They were equals in every sense. She matched his strength with her wit, his seriousness with her joy. Together, they found what so few ever do, a love that made them better, softer, more human. Even now, decades later, their names are spoken together, Carole and Clark, the Queen and her King. Visitors to Forest Lawn still leave flowers at their side-by-side tombs, tokens of remembrance for a love that time could not erase. In their story, people find hope, the belief that love, once found, can outlast even tragedy. Because in the end, even the brightest stars burn out. Fame fades, beauty dims, and the world moves on. But love, true, selfless, soul-deep love, never dies. It lingers in the stories we tell, in the hearts that remember, and in the quiet between two names carved forever in stone. Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. 2 stars. One love. Eternal.